Say, well, I think we can. I think pretty soon we should engage. But a couple of things. So thinking about what Maggie's legacy was, a lot of what we talked about is really raising the concept of ageism to popularizing it and making people really understand what it was. Who coined it? I mean, I think Bob Butler coined it, the term, but Maggie really embodied it. And I mean, embodied the anger about it and the problems that it created. So I think that's really a lasting legacy, and there are a lot of others. But Maggie was, like all people, had full of some contradictions, right? I mean, Maggie was the sweetest person you could imagine, and that's how she was able to convey her messages so effectively, because she just was full of love, and she loved. I mean, she really didn't agree with anything about Ronald Reagan, but she would sort of, talk about him in terms, like I said, isn't he interesting? Which meant, he's a lowlife. But I remember when Paul and I had the good fortune of being on a trip to China in 1978 that Maggie led. It was almost a month in China, right after Carter normalized relations. It was a study tour on aging. And so, Mao was still very much in favor. There were only Mao jackets. Anybody's been to China lately, there were no cars. There were about maybe half a dozen cars in Beijing. They were all black government cars, millions of bicycles. And the whole Mao philosophy of cooperation first, competition second. And we had buttons that we wore, and we touted this stuff and as we went around China. But there was a point where we went to this arcade where they had bicycles that were hooked up to a racetrack. So you could pedal the bike and your horse on the track would go faster or slower depending on how fast you were pedaling. And here are Maggie and several of us Gray Panthers on these bikes with our cooperation first, competition second, breaking the bicycles to try to beat the next person on the track. And Maggie was there with us. I remember one time I was in Las Vegas with her, and she wanted to play a slot machine. And of course, wherever Maggie went, people would recognize her. And so she's, got her glasses down, and she's pulling the lever and putting her coins in. And this woman comes up from behind her who had spotted her, and says, Maggie, you've changed my life. And Maggie said, wait a minute, I'm playing this.
I think, well, and we do want to hopefully get engaged with you all and have questions. We were going to talk a little bit about the organizational issue. I mean, so there's a wonderful legacy. Obviously, there are people like Ashley, people who are the OWL, which basically on that trip, a woman named Tish Summers, we were taking a boat ride on the, I guess it was the Yangtze, and started talking about the idea of her own situation, which was a basically displaced homemaker who didn't, husband, I forget, her husband died or left, I don't remember, but whatever, she was alone and had no recent work history, no pension, too young for Social Security benefits, even on the basis of her husband. And there ought to be an organization, and she founded, on that trip, I mean, the discussion really was about the displaced homemaker issue, which ultimately became the Older Women's League, OWL, which still exists, which Ashley was director of. And a lot of, I'm sure many of you still live in the legacy of Maggie. My son Ben, who knew her and has wonderful photos and memories of her. So that's all very positive. I mean, some of the organizational issues that you couldn't get away from is, why the strengths or weaknesses of the Gray Panthers. When you create almost, and she was very good at creative chaos. I mean, in other words, but you have chapters, I think Al may have similarities. I'm on the board of OWL now. May have similarities in that you can't really control the kinds of people that you want to have in your organization. They're going to go do their own thing anyway, and how do you run an organization like that? And the big issue that we talked about, Maggie and I, and I'm sure others also, was how do you take, I mean, she knew, even though she knew she was only part of, I mean, the the issue, or she was like all the rest of us, but she knew she was special in the sense that the media thought she was, and she was what the Gray Panthers were about. And how do you take that, in essence, talking about Mao, cult of the personality, and infuse it back into the organization so that you can move on and the organization can stay strong? I don't think that they found a solution to that. Even though she and I sat on the beach in Maui, smoking a joint, trying to figure out the answer to that question. And we didn't come up. Now we found out a lot of other answers, but not the answer.
So I'll just make a few more comments about legacy. And Maggie, there's no question the Older Women's League was an important product of her work and bringing in Tish Summers, who was an incredible woman herself, the founder, co-founder with Lori Shields and others of the Older Women's League. But she also, Families USA Today, it's not USA Today, but began as the Villers Foundation, and Kate Villers and Philippe Villers founded the Villers Foundation and put $40 million of stock from robotics firm that was very successful. And their whole goal, the first thing they did was talk to Gray Panthers in Boston, and came to Glorieta, New Mexico, to a conference that...
Can I just say what happened was that I had left the law center and I was living in New Mexico, and I wanted to do a summer institute because we had all these wonderful people that I knew, and you know, it's opera season in Santa Fe and people want to come to New Mexico. Why not have a summer institute? So the first person I called was Maggie, and she said she would come. And Carroll, were you there? No. Several other, Fernando was there. And we all came to Santa Fe, and I got a call from a legal services lawyer in Boston, legal aid lawyer, said, I've got this couple here. They want to spend $40 million on aging. Can they come to your conference? And I said, yeah. And I picked them up at the airport. And took them to Santa Fe, and as Carroll said, the rest is history. Carroll, Fernando, Maggie worked on it, and then the next thing is the Villers Foundation.
Just since we're talking about the Villers, just another word about that. So I was working for Claude Pepper for the House Committee on Aging in early, I think it was 1982. And I got a call from Phil Villers, who said he wanted to meet with Claude Pepper. And he said he had $40 million he wanted to invest in aging and set up a foundation. So I went to Claude Pepper and I said, there's this guy Phil Villers, I don't know who he is. He says he has $40 million. So I said, you want to meet with him? And he said, he said, I'll meet with anybody who has $40 billion. So Phil Villers shows up for the meeting in jeans. Find out he doesn't even have a wallet on him because he left it with his wife. He sits down, puts his foot up, he's got holes in the bottom of his shoes, and I'm thinking, this guy is not the real deal. But he ended up being the real deal. It's not really a Maggie story, but since we were talking
we could keep going, so we will stop.
So I just want to close with a couple more. I think of how Maggie was such a motivator of young people, and she was also incredibly avid reader and interested in learning new things. And one time when I was in Philadelphia, we were talking about the future of the Gray Panthers and what she might do. She said, I'm so exhausted. And I said, how about a sabbatical at the University of California, San Francisco? And Maggie was so famous, you couldn't pull her off the road long, so the sabbatical was about 10 days long. And she came and we brought in professors, good political economists, more radical thinkers around healthcare and the medical industrial complex, and around global imperialism and issues like that.